All right. Welcome back if you came to the first session. If you're new, this is Advanced XojoScript, Xojo's coolest feature. So I'm Marc Zeedar, a publisher of XDev magazine, and I really love XojoScript. Today we're going to talk about, so I'm assuming most of you came to the first session. If not, you already know the basics of XojoScript, so I'll just dive right in and get into some of the advanced things I'll talk about. So first thing I'll talk about is building a function library. This is like trivially simple thing. It's almost embarrassingly simple, but it's just really, really cool. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. I'm also going to talk about replicating Xojo objects. So if you're in the last session, I talked about how there's certain things that aren't available, certain classes like date class and folder item that are not available in XojoScript. I'm going to show you how we can create those in XojoScript and duplicate. We're going to clone them. And the other thing, I'll show an example of basically creating your own API with XojoScript and using that in a project. And so the first thing we're going to just talk about building a function library. So a function library is just basically say you've got a bunch of scripts and you want to do a common routine, and you can actually in your XojoScript you can actually create a function in your script and call it from within itself. But let's say that's a common function that you would like your other script to have, right? So instead of having to rewrite or copy and paste that script, that function, in multiple scripts, you can just store that script in one location and just have a library of scripts, right? So the example I use is my Transmogrify app. And so I have a folder called functions, and inside that I have a bunch of text files, which are just scripts. And they're just functions defined just like you would in Xojo. And they can some of them have actually more than one function in them. Some of them are just one function. It doesn't really matter. But basically what we do is these functions and whatever XojoScript you're running are merged together at runtime, and they become one XojoScript. And basically, XojoScript doesn't really care where the functions are, right? They could be at the beginning or the end, so we can just basically append them to the script that you write. And then if your script refers to any of those function names, your script works, right? It just calls those functions. They're all, as far as it's concerned, you wrote one really long script, even though you actually wrote a script this big. That make sense? So I'll show you an example of that. So if we go out here to, well, I'll show you the slide first. Let's see. So basically, you have your file, you drop it onto the Transmogrify app. The functions, merge with the XojoScript, and you get your output, just like we saw in the last session. So if we actually look here at the functions, I mentioned, let's see. Okay, so here's a function. This is called tab functions, and so these are some functions that I've done for working with tab text. And so, oh, that's a good point. I'm off screen. Sorry about that. I don't know, the projector must just be cutting things off a little bit. So basically, I've got functions for rearranging columns. Have you ever had to do that, where you get some tab text, and I know most people just like open it up in Excel or something, and then start swapping the columns around or whatever. I just made some functions in my script, so I can basically write a script that looks at a tab delimited file and swaps values back, swaps columns or, a variety of things. And basically I create all this logic, one time in my functions that I created. And as long as they're debugged and working, I just have other scripts that can call these and work with these any way I want. So it's pretty cool. So here's a function called getCell. So I can actually feed it a tab text and actually, I want the third row down and the fifth, whatever I want, and just pull that data out and do something with it, which is pretty fun. So this particular, see here's that extract column. So that example that I showed that did the alignment of the tab text file, it called this extract column. And so basically we just tell it which column, give it the text and which column we're doing, and it, splits it out. And you can see the code there is pretty familiar to anybody using Xojo. It's just ordinary Xojo code. I'm not doing anything too radical. I've got fields and arrays and splits and pretty familiar stuff, hopefully. But by putting all these functions in this one file, this file gets merged with my script, and then I can access all of these functions in any of my scripts. So really, like I said, it's almost trivially simple. I did this. This was the first program I did this with, and now I pretty much do this with every project that I do that uses XojoScript, because this is just so powerful to be able to have you know, a library of functions, and you can just reuse parts. So basically, you just write a function once, you never have to write it again. You just reuse it, and it's really, really handy. So, any questions about that? Okay, yes, how is actually merges in there. So let me actually just show you the code. It's not very complicated. So this is that convert file routine we were at before in the last session, where we've actually, you know, we dropped a text file on the program. It's running it. Here is the line. Well, let's see. Go back here so you can actually see the whole line. I'll highlight it and zoom out a little bit. So that is the line right there. That's how simple it is, right? We just read in the script. I put a blank line just in case, so that stuff doesn't, you know, go on top of each other. Just put a blank line between, and then I have a function called load functions, which literally just loads all of those text files into one big string, right? You can look at it if you want, but it literally just is a loop, goes through all the files, creates one big string, returns a string called all, you know, returns all functions, and that's it. So it just gets appended to your main script that you wrote, and then all those functions are now available to your script. So, make sense? Any questions? That was easy. But that one, it really is easy, but it's just one of those things. I keep hitting Command R to run my keynote, and because I'm used to Xojo and hitting Command R all the time. Run my project, it doesn't run keynote. But this one is just, it's so simple, but it's just really, really powerful, because it just gives you a way to just, you know, reuse a lot of code, and I just love it. So much more complicated. We'll start with a simple example. I've actually got two examples about this that I'll show, but is replicating Xojo objects. So we mentioned before how you can't use things like a date class, okay, in Xojo. XojoScript doesn't know what date is, right? That's a part of the framework. And so the way that I did this, and I talked about this at a talk a few years ago, and I was one little part of the bigger talk, and somebody said, you know, the whole talk should have been this, because it's a little bit complicated. It's not really that complicated, but it's just a little, if you're not familiar with things, it's a little bit hard to get wrap your brain around. But what I wanted to do is, there's two ways you could approach cloning something like the date class. One is, I could just write all the date code in XojoScript, right? I could just try to duplicate all the work that Xojo engineers have already done, and I could sit here and go, okay, these are leap years, and doing all the math, and try to figure out how dates work, and create my own class that's a date class that, you know, just acts exactly like the Xojo one, right? So the two problems with that is, that's a huge amount of work. I'm duplicating work that other engineers have already done, so that's kind of dumb, right? And then thirdly, my class may not work exactly the same as theirs, right? I might do some different math, and you know, there's a lot of edge cases and weird stuff with leap years and everything else that, you know, I might have bugs. It's like, it's not really worth going that approach. So what I decided to do is, I said that I don't want to go to do that much work. That's not very logical. So what I did was, I said the date class exists inside Xojo, right? So in the main program that I'm running, it has access to the date class. I just can't access it in the XojoScript itself. So here's what I did. In the main program, in my context object, I created a dictionary object that holds all of my dates. And I give every date that's created gets a unique ID, which is the key in the dictionary, right? So I can look up by the key, the unique ID, any date that I've created, okay? So in my XojoScript, which is what you see here on the screen, this code, I actually create a new class called date class. I've created a private thing, a private integer property called date ID. And you'll notice here, I've actually, I actually call a constructor. So this is within XojoScript, right? I'm actually creating a constructor which calls you'll see it says date ID equals date underscore new date, okay? That date underscore new date is a a function, a function that I've created in my main context object, which actually generates a unique ID, so we know it's unique. None of them are going to have, no two dates are going to have the same unique, same ID, and it assigns it to this class. So this class, once I have an object with this, since it's got a private date ID as integer, it will remember its own ID, right? And then anytime I want to talk back to the main program, I just have to pass it that ID and say, I am this date, whatever the unique ID is, and then it knows how to work with it, right? So in other words, my XojoScript itself is not really doing anything with dates. It's not doing any kind of calculations and anything. All I'm doing is creating methods that mimic the ones in the main class, right? The date class that's inside Xojo. And as long as I pass it the correct ID, it will look up the date that we have created and use that and do the calculations for me, basically using Xojo to do the calculations, right? So I'm really using the date class. I'm just mimicking the structure of it inside my XojoScript. So let me actually show you. Okay, so there's some more code there. So you can see the code is fairly simple. I'm creating properties, get set properties for the month, the year, things like that. So you can basically work with it exactly the way you would in Xojo, in regular Xojo, where you'd say .month equals whatever, or you can have it tell you what the month is, by putting the month property on the right. So all the routines here that have date underscore as the beginning, I just did it that way. So those are all calls back to the main program that are methods that I created, functions inside the context object. And so I just prefixed them all with the date underscore so that I know they're date related. And that's what we're calling with all of that. So basically the steps for this, we create the class in XojoScript like this. Just what I basically just explained to you. We're just creating, so each one automatically, by putting it in the constructor, I'm guaranteed that they all have a unique ID because it's created as part of the constructor. So in my XojoScript, if I want to work with a date, I would just say dim d as new date class, right? And bingo, that date has a unique ID. I don't need to know what it is, and my script doesn't care, right? It just needs to work with it. So my script just works with it like it's a normal date. And now I could have just called this class date, but to me that gets a little confusing. And so just to make it a little clearer, I just called it date class. But if I hadn't done that, if I'd actually called it date, you could literally copy any kind of date code from a Xojo, Xojo project that you have, paste it into your script, and it should work because it works exactly the same. I mimicked all of the same functions that are in the date class. Should work exactly the same. Now I'll probably have to expand this when they add the new, API 2.0 and they change how the date class works, or add new stuff. But for now, it mimics the classic date class by doing that. So let's see here. Yes, question? Okay, so the question is, can you override operators in XojoScript? I don't think so. I've never tried that. I haven't really done that in regular Xojo either. So, I don't think so. I don't think there's a way to do that. That's an interesting question. But anybody have an answer to that? Do you, Greg, or anybody out there? No? Oh, okay. Greg said he'll find out before we end. So, I know I've never done it. So, so basically, this is the new date function call or method that's in the main app, right? So this is when that constructor gets called, when we just in our XojoScript created a new date, this gets called. We first make sure the dictionary exists, okay, the first line there. Secondly, we just increment an integer of the ID because it's just a number, so they'll all have the different number. And then we just assign it to the dictionary, right, with new date. So we just created a date object. That's all we did. The only thing that's tricky is we're actually storing the date object in the main app because we can't really store it inside the script, right? So we're just kind of tricking our way around this. But so let me show you a demo. So this is the, did I already open it? No, I did not. Okay. So this is the date class clone. And again, all these files are available for you to download and play with. So here's the main window. So first all I'll do, I'll just run this and we can play with it a little bit. And so I'm going to make, let's see, I can make this window bigger, but I don't think it helps much because the script is actually pretty small. But this is the full script. So basically all we've done here, most of this script is just defining the date class, right? So you'll see some of these SQL date time, abbreviated date, long date, short date. These are all the same kinds of things that we have in Xojo when you work with a date object, right? So we get to the end here, we have end class. So all that stuff is just defining, and pretty much all of those you can see, we're just calling back to the main program and telling the main program to do the work, right? And all of these, you'll see, they all pass the date ID when they call back to the main program. So the main program, all those functions have a parameter. They require the date ID. That way we know which date we're working with, because you could create hundreds of dates if you wanted in your Xojo script. And this way they're all stored inside the main app, and they all have a unique ID. We can always access them, and it works great. So then what we do is actually write this is some actual code that's going to actually create a new date. And just to simplify it, I put the new on a separate line, and we do some print things that'll print out the results similar to the demo I did last time, just to give us some results here. So we can do print SQL date. Basically, this code right here, if you copied the code from the dim statement down, you should be able to copy that, paste it into a Xojo, inside Xojo, and it should run, right? Because this is just regular standard date stuff, except that I use date class instead of date, sorry. You'd have to change that to date instead of date class. But other than that, that's just that one tiny change. Everything just works like a date object. So shall we actually see if this works? If I hit run here, the default date, which when we created it was today, that looks correct. And then the new date, which I added at down here, I said the new date was 2013, month 6, day 30, and told it to print out the new date and print the SQL date, and it prints it like that, right? So we could go down here to our script and do something like print d long date. I think that's the right syntax. And now it has added the long date like that, right? So basically we can access, any of these functions we can, access in our script, and they just work like a regular date. The only change that I've made is it's called date class instead of date. Other than that, we've now created a clone that works exactly like the date class, because it is the date class inside Xojo, right? So, and you could take this same principle and recreate folder items, whatever, all kinds of things that you wanted to do. It's just you have to trick Xojo into creating and maintaining those objects inside itself. But what's really cool about this is it's a little bit of work to set it up initially. It's not really that bad. But once you've done it, the date class, all you have to really worry about is the date class, this part here. And this code up here, in this particular example, I'm including the date class definition inside the Xojo script, but that could be one of those functions in the library that I mentioned. That's how I usually would use this, is I would create this, put it inside one of my function folders, function files, so it automatically gets added to everything that I do. And then I just work with dates. I don't have to think about it. Now I can work with dates in XojoScript, right? And so it makes it really cool and really easy to do stuff. So, and you can pretty much do your math on the dates and whatever you want to do. It's just like dates. So, any questions? Is that confusing everybody? Is it good? So, and again, you can download this class and play with it. So, I'll just show you real quick, some of these examples if you want to see it. This is how simple most of these methods are, right? So this is the we're getting the month. So this is return date from ID. It gets the date, it passes the date ID and returns the month, right? So it's looking up, this just calls a function that looks up the date object from the dictionary, returns that object that it found, and then returns the month object, the month value back to the script. So the script just works with it like regular date object, but inside here it's just talking to a regular Xojo date object, and but all of these are like one line long. They're pretty simple. There's a couple. There's a couple that are a little bit more complicated, but they're all very simple. Greg. Okay, answer. Operator methods do work in XojoScript. Okay, there's your answer. So you could override the operator methods and create something that would work however you wanted. Yeah, that's pretty cool. It is nice. Amazing. Yeah, I find a lot of things like that. I think, oh, this can't work. And then it's like, oh, no, it does work. So let's see. All right. So let's get to something a little more complicated. So one of my projects, I ended up creating a picture class clone, which is basically a clone of the picture object that's in Xojo. I call it xPicture. You can see from the script here, the code there, if you can read that. But I'll show you this as a demo so you can actually get a feel of how this actually works. So let me actually just close up some of these files here and picture class. So actually, the first thing I'll do, let me show you this. So this picture, this is how simple this is. Okay, I've got my project file and I've got a file here called library, right? So I'm just gonna open this up in BBEdit. Let me move it over so you can see the other side there. So this is basically my xPicture class definition. And this one's not directly a direct clone. It's not a direct clone of the picture class in Xojo. It's more like similar. So that's probably the reason I called it xClass, just because I don't want to get too confused. It was created for a particular project that I was working on, and so I called it that. But it works very similar to how I clone the date class, where we've got a constructor. It assigns certain values that, in this case, instead of using a unique ID like a number, I use a name. So in this particular program, when I create a picture, I give it a name, and that name needs to be unique. And then every one of my pictures I can refer to by name, and that's basically how they're passed around and stuff inside the XojoScript. But this particular class, I've got lots and lots of things that you can do with the pictures, from cropping to, and this one's actually a subset of the real one that I wrote. I just picked a few of them, but you can draw boxes, you can crop things, you can draw filled boxes, draw circles. I've got a bunch of routines that are really cool, like draw picture centered. It'll actually just automatically center. You just give it a picture, and it'll center it on your graphics inside the picture that it's drawing. So you can also put it where you want it and scale it. So you see a lot of these draw picture. It's the same name of the routine, but there's different parameters. So you can use the same command, draw picture, but do different things with it depending on what you're wanting to do. So like the most powerful one is this one, where you can actually specify exactly where it is and the scale of it. And so instead of having to, if you've ever tried to draw pictures with the regular graphics command where you have to, it's very tedious. This one I can just put in a scale, say 0.5, and it draws it at 50%. So just makes it easy. And I've got text routines, I've got font routines, I've got bold and italic and things like that. You can specify the font and the font family. I've got style, the font styles, opacity, so you can do that. Quite a few things with it. So the wimpy graphic that I created for the demo, let me run this, and hit run. It's running the script. It's actually, so what I did is it's actually creating a graphic, passing the graphic back to the main app. The main app is then displaying the graphic here. I'll make the picture wider so you can see it. It's it off the screen. So basically, this is the code. We're drawing we're creating a new picture. I named it test. I told it to be 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. Gave it a 4-color red, drew a filled box with those parameters, drew a blue circle. I created, there's a shadow property that is used for the text. So I drew some text here, and it drew the text. For some reason, it's not drawing it in the right font. I don't know why, but that's interesting. So maybe I don't have that font installed. That could be. I was testing this on a different machine. So, but basically, you can see it drew it yellow, and it has a nice, drop shadow behind the text, and you can turn that on and off. So if you say, well, we could put false, or we could just, comment it out. So, why did that do that? Unknown identifier. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that was the, I tried to put an apostrophe for the comment. I usually use those for temporary comments, but Mac OS turned it into a curly one, so it didn't know what that was. So, but that was an example of a XojoScript error that we just solved. So yeah, on a coding issue. So you can see now I turned that off, and we've got no thing there. So I can also do things like this. Let's see, let's go over here to the blue. I'll paste this in. I'm going to change this to a 50. So I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. So I just added an opacity of 50 before the blue, right? And if I hit run there, now our blue circle is transparent, right? So, and then you can do even crazy things like this. This is really wild. So I just uncomment this. So this is, I'm drawing picture. So again, at the top, we've created a picture called P, right? That's our picture object. So this is very similar to working with a picture object inside Xojo, right? It's you create the name of the picture and you draw with it and stuff. So I do p.drawPicture, and then I tell it to draw picture P, partly because I only have one picture here, but and then I tell it where to do it. And this particular picture command that I'm using, it's giving it the coordinates of where to draw it. So it'll be 400 degrees to the x and 10 down, and then I tell it to do it at 25% value. So what do you think that'll do when I run this? Hey, look at that. We've got a miniature version of the same graphic. Kind of cool, kind of bizarre, but just kind of showing an example of how you can actually, I could have done things, I don't have it in this demo, but you could do things like, pull a picture from a file and then draw that picture here. That's how I use it in my other projects. Like bring in a logo or something and put it on the page and create something from it. And but basically, this allows you to do it. It's a pretty full-featured drawing environment. I mean, the real one that I have some rotation, and I can even do gradients. I have a class of drawing stuff that I used that was from somebody posted years ago, and so I incorporated that into this, so I can do a lot of powerful drawing stuff, and it's all scriptable. And so I use it in a project that I'll show you in a bit that lets me draw programmatically. So it's really, really powerful. But again, this is working the exact same way the date class which was working, which is we've got a context object with all of these methods. So all those things that we're doing, draw box, draw circle, draw shadow text, everything's calling back to the main program. And the main program is storing the actual picture object. So we've actually created an actual Xojo picture object, and we're drawing in it. And then, but we can do things like, I don't know if I have it in this one for saving it, but that's not the save one. Here's the save one. So you could actually tell it where to save, and this particular one is wanting to save it in a picture folder. So it would save it in that particular folder the way that I've set it up. But you could set this up however you wanted for whatever your project was, for whatever you need. But basically, that gives me a way to create a script that can actually draw something and then export it, and then I can use it in something else, which is pretty cool. So, any questions about that? Is that good? All right, cool. All right, let's go back and I'll show you, I probably have time for a demo of this, I think. So so this is how to create your own API, which is a fancy way of basically saying I'm creating my own programming language. Because basically what you do, this is the main app, the original app that I have where I created the picture stuff, and I called it XPub Picture because my program is called XPub, and it's a publishing program that I've been working on for a few years, and it'll probably be a few more years before I finish it. But basically, the concept is I really want to use it for me as a publisher to be able to take text files that are in Markdown format. Basically, you dump them into this program, and it spits out PDF, Mobi, which is Kindle format, and EPUB format, which is the top three electronic document formats. And basically, I've got instant books or whatever I'm trying to create. Theoretically, I could eventually create the magazine this way as my long-term goal. And then I can get away from having to use, Adobe products and stuff. So, but the idea too is also it's much more powerful. The way my program works, it's all based on scripts. So basically, I could have books that I want to publish on XDev library, and they can have one script that automatically formats everything the way that we want to publish stuff on XDev library, so that they all have the same look and feel and style. And then I can have a different script that runs when I want to create XDev magazine, and it would have its look and feel and whatever. And I can have scripts that are embedded inside there that do really fancy things. So I'll show you some examples in a second. So this is my case study. This is an example of the program, very fancy program. You drop a file, a folder of Markdown files on here, and it automatically produces all these formats is basically the concept. But looks like we've got a few minutes, so I'll show you a demo if you want to see it. Let me get back here to the Finder. So this is the fancy folder. And this does actually, I'll run it quickly because it does take, I was running it earlier on this machine. I forgot this is an old 2015 MacBook, and it takes it like 90 seconds to actually generate the files on this particular book. It's a, I can find it here again, come on. This is a Zane Grey book that was Writers of the Purple Sage. So if we look at the actual Markdown, how many are familiar with Markdown? It's a plain text format that uses things like, for example, you put number signs at the beginning of lines, that's the header it is. So single one is like an H1 header in HTML, and a 3.1 is an H3 header. So you can basically create headers. And so I use this, and I said that double ones are chapter titles, basically. So this is how the text looks. It's just downloaded from Gutenberg library, and it's just 600K of text. And let me get rid of this one. So that's what it looks like. And if we actually run what's going on here? What? Did it run? Oh, okay. I guess I didn't run it yet. Oh no, wait. Compiler error. Oh, great. That's bizarre. It worked this morning. What did I do?
You did sacrifice a lamb.
Oh, yeah, that's really strange. Oh, wait, I know what I did. I didn't actually run it from here. I have a... Okay, where's my thing? I have a compiled version. I think that's what I ran, so... That makes more sense. Okay. So what was actually happening, I saw that error. It's the image play library that I use that gives me a lot more of the graphic stuff, and it's obsolete. So the guy uses like the new picture command, which is one word, and they've changed that in Xojo syntax. So that's what's causing it some problems. Okay. So I'll go ahead and start this working, and I'll talk while it's working because, like I said, it takes about 90 seconds, 81 seconds to actually create this book. But so while it's working. It's going to give me a nice beach ball. I will zoom in here and show you. So you can actually see some of the stuff it's doing. It's already generating it's mostly the PDFs that take the long time, but it's actually creating EPUBs. EPUB is basically a zip file without the zip extension. It's an EPUB extension, but it's inside it, and it's got to have a certain structure with HTML inside it and stuff. So I have my program right now, because it's just for me, it actually publishes all this stuff out so that I can see it and debug it. But in reality, you would normally just have the individual file without you wouldn't see all this. You would just get the EPUB. But this way I can actually look inside the EPUB and debug it. So looks like it's still doing some processing here. So I'll show you real quick. This is the script that I use. Let me make sure this opens in BBEdit. So this is my script that generates I say it generates a PDF book at iPhone size. So basically my goal here was to be able to create, I had this idea when I was thinking about all this stuff that wouldn't it be cool if you could create like PDFs don't resize, but I prefer PDFs for reading because you can do a lot more things with fonts and control stuff, and as a publisher it's just a better format. But then it has a disadvantage of, people have different size devices and it's hard to read, something formatted for a big page on a tiny device. So I said, well, but this is all script, right? So my script can just, here's how my script works, right? It just start a new book, right? Looks very similar, it's typical Xojo code of a new object. And I have a few things here where I'm setting some metadata about the book, getting the title and stuff like that. I split it into chapters because you saw that was one long file. So I actually split it into chapters. I actually create a cover. And then we publish it. And then what I do is I actually change the size of the page size and some of the font settings. And then I say, create another book, that's the size for an iPhone. And here's the create the cover, which actually uses some of the drawing stuff to actually create a cover. And so when this is actually finished, oh, it looks like it did finish. Oh, I do have sound turned on. It doesn't play a sound, but I forgot that. So, okay, so let's zoom in over here. I'll show you. So the first one we'll look at is just the main PDF. So this is basically formatted like for an 8.5 by 11, right? So we've got automatic table of contents. We zoom in here, and this is where it's really cool. You'll see we've got a header at the top with the author and the title. We've got a chapter. We've got a drop cap. The first line is bold. We've got some extra text there. There's actually a page number at the bottom, if you can see that. And this is, I can't remember how many pages this one is, but it's, the iPhone one is like 500 pages because the pages are tiny, right? So this one's probably a couple hundred pages or something. It has to think to bring it up. So yeah, 248 pages there. So, but you saw how cool that is. I mean, it created a PDF that's nicely formatted, and this would read great on an iPad or something like that. But I also created an iPhone version, which has an iPhone extension, which looks very similar, except that the page size is actually 4 inches or something, so it's formatted to read easy on an iPad. And I tested it; it actually reads really nice. But you can see it's still got the same formatting, all that stuff. So this kind of stuff, like the drop cap and stuff like that, that's all handled by various settings in my script. And define how I want to do things, and my CSS. So use a combination of CSS for how things look, and a combination of my scripts that actually can modify how the files look. And this one's like 500 pages long, like I said. So, and then obviously you don't have page sizes with the EPUB and the Mobi one, but they basically, I can't really show those because they don't display on the, I have to load them up on a Kindle or something. But you get the idea. So that basically my program just can generate something like that from one thing. So the cover on this one is really, really simple because it's just I just write the text with the title there. But I do have other projects, and I won't show you all the, this is my documentation example. So let me just show you it's not very fancy, but it has, let's see, wait. That one actually is the iPhone one. So basically I created, I put a logo on there and I put my manual, and so Stone Table Software is my software company basically. So all this stuff is this whole cover with the gradient and everything is all generated from the script. So makes it a lot, if you've ever done any kind of publishing where you have to do graphics and stuff like that, it's a huge pain. So this basically can automate all that. And so I thought this would be a great way to save me a lot of time if I can eventually get it working for different publishing projects. So, but basically with the graphics, I can, be pretty powerful with the graphics and create stuff. So I'm pretty liking it. So anyway, I think that's about it. Looks like got a few minutes left. If we've got some questions. No questions? Oh, you got a question? I'm using the what is it? I can never remember the WK, what is it? Yeah, so yes, what tool I'm using to create the PDFs is WK HTML2 PDF. The 2 is a number 2. And it's a command line tool that's public domain or open source. It's free and runs on Mac, Windows, I'm assuming Linux, and basically it's a command line tool, so you just use a shell script and talk to it, and it's really fairly complicated. I've had some articles that I wrote about it in XDev, and but what's cool is I created my own class that so it just basically talks to it and handles that part of it. So basically, once I've got that class created that talks to the command line and does all that, it makes it really easy. Basically, you just feed it HTML files, and it uses WebKit to create that into a PDF. And it's definitely idiosyncratic. There's definitely some issues with it, but it is really powerful. And when it works, it's really cool. And it's not the fastest. You don't have super control over it, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I think that's one of the reasons I've had some issues with this, because I'm not sure if it'll quite give me all the control that I need for what I'm doing. I may have to look at something else, but I've looked at other things, and drawing my own PDFs from scratch or something, it's complicated. So this tool might be what I need. So I take the Markdown. Correct. Yeah, Markdown is a format that's designed. The actual Markdown thing is a Perl script that actually converts to HTML, but it does it in such a basic way that you can use that to almost convert it to XML or anything else. And so that makes it really useful for converting it to whatever kind of format you want. And so you can easily, in that conversion process, you can add things like, you could customize it. That's what I do, to add custom CSS tags and things like that, so I can style things. And since it's all scriptable, it makes it really easy to make my appearance of my whatever file I'm generating, look a certain way, because that's all handled by the script. So I get the power of CSS for the appearance, but I get the simplicity of Markdown for the actual text, because Markdown is just plain text. It's really super easy to work with, and I love that. I hate having to have proprietary, word processor, InDesign files that, you're very limited. You go to a new machine or new operating system, and something doesn't work, and it's really frustrating. So plain text is just, I love it. So you had a question? Oh, yes. Any format. So Gary's saying there's is it an online tool, or is it something you download? Oh, okay. So it's called Pandoc, Pandoc, and it's apparently a converter tool that you do things. I have some articles in XDev where I've used DocVerter, which is a web service that's actually pretty cool. I first tried it. Somebody had told me about it, and actually, I think it was on the Xojo blog. They talked about it, and I started. You actually send your files to the web service, and it comes back with a PDF or whatever you want. And I thought, this can't be very fast or whatever, and it's free, and it works great. It's surprisingly good, So there are some different tools. You could kind of adapt it however you want, And Monkey Bread also has some plugins for producing PDFs and things like that too. So there's definitely a lot of choices depending on what kind of power you need. Correct. Yeah. So he's saying that Dave Sizemore has a Markdown converter that he wrote in Xojo. So it's native. It's not a plugin or anything like that. It's just actual Xojo code that will actually convert Markdown to HTML. And so that might be something, if you really wanted to customize how that converts or things like that, having that source code, you could do that, and that's pretty cool. So a lot of different choices, things what you want to do. But what I like about this project for me is just the fact that I can script with XojoScript how some of these actions happen. So for me, when you're automating things, and that's the goal, is basically to be able to produce more books really easily and not have to have a huge amount of time, spend the time on the writing and the editing and stuff that you can't automate, and less time on just tedious stuff like creating covers and just pagination, table of contents, indexing, all kinds of tedious stuff that you don't want to have. You have to do it for every single book, and then every time there's a change, right, you have to redo it all. So this way, this simplifies things a lot, if I can get it eventually working the way I want. So, any other questions? Last chance? Yeah, I think we're pretty spot on time. So, all right, sounds good. So, let me.